I had promised here a while back that I would go through a little bit of information on what Ezekiel was referring to, or what Yahweh was referring to in the book of Ezekiel that we've been reading. You know, because we've been reading each chapter in the book of Ezekiel, right? And we talked about some of those things, and they talked about Baal and Ashtaroth and some of the things that were going on. So I tried to put together some scriptures so you can read it right out of the Bible and get an idea of what really is the issue. Now, before I start, let me say this. How many of you have encountered the worship of the god or the Baal type gods, the different Baalim? How many of you have ever worshiped Baal? Or been involved? How many of you know people that worship Baal? Or Ashtaroth? What's that? Lord. The word Baal means Lord, right? And that is significant. That is a significant part of this, okay? Well, you might be very surprised at the modern practices that people do that have been enshrined in things that you and I have become accustomed to, such as Easter and Christmas, which are derived from the worship of Baal and Ashtaroth. And I'll say that again. The things that occur in Christmas and Easter do come from the worship of Baal and Ashtaroth. That's where they come from. They do not come from a genuine worship of Yahshua the Messiah, even if you want to use a false name for Yahshua called Jesus. Because when those practices were established many, many years ago for Christmas and Easter in the Christian churches, originally in the Roman Catholic Church, and been passed on down through pretty much all of Christianity, those things actually were from the pagan worship of Baal and Ashtaroth, which had come on down through the other cultures and nations and so forth, and the church incorporated those things into their service so that they would make the pagans feel comfortable and come to church. Okay? Now, I'm not going to go into a lot of detail about that today. But we have Easter coming up very soon. And I would like for a presentation to be made on the subject of Easter so that people are quite familiar with it. But I'm going to go through some of the things involved with the worship of Baal and Ashtaroth so that you've got some background so that you know what is going on. Because when you read a lot of things in the Bible, you know, I know if you're like me, you'll read a bunch of those things and you'll go, okay, gee, that was a bad time of history, right? At least, but it doesn't apply now. At least we don't have to fool with that now. And what I'm telling you is that it's as much up to date now as it was back then. It's just in a different form. And if you really become knowledgeable about what was going on back then and why those things occurred, you'll be able to recognize the same spirit involved in the things today and discern and avoid being deceived by Lucifer, the dragon, the serpent, the devil, the Satan and his angels, also called Baal and Ashtaroth, okay? Also called Venus, Diana, Mars, all these others, Jupiter, right? All going back to Nimrod, Semiramis, and Tammuz, which we'll talk about a little bit, okay? But I want you to see enough in the scriptures so you have some knowledge of what's in the Bible and why it's in there and what the problem was, and then we can hopefully bring it up to date on another occasion, like I said, with someone that can give us a good lecture on Easter and maybe tie some of this together. Fair enough? Now, There's several places in the book of Ezekiel where we've been reading where this is discussed, but in this chapter that we just read this morning, I think 35th through the 39th verses, I've given the readers a list of scriptures. And I just want you to see the more relevant part of this one in Ezekiel 23. So go to, I think it's to the 35th verse through 39th verse. Whatever it is on your scripture list, you tell us what's going on. And we're going to be doing some scripture reading. You readers, just go ahead and help me out, please.
Ezekiel 23:35. Therefore, thus saith Yahweh Elohim, because thou hast forgotten me and cast me behind thy back, therefore bear thou also thy lewdness and thy whoredoms.
Now you'll notice, by the way, in here, in this particular scripture, as with others, he continually calls the nation of Israel a whore. He's just constantly saying she's a whore. Okay? And Yahweh married her, and she became a whore. And that's not my words. That's the words in the Bible. And you should ask yourself a question, why would that expression be used all the time? Well, when Yahweh brought the nation of Israel up out of bondage in Egypt, or actually I should say the Confederate brothers of Israel, because they were not a nation. They were not a single nation until Yahweh made them a nation and a kingdom here, and Yahweh became their king in the wilderness of Sinai. But at this point, when Yahweh made the covenant with them, called the Old Covenant or the Old Testament, that was a marriage. Yahweh was the husband, she was the bride, the wife. Now, do you know what in those times wives called their husbands, what the word was? No, baby. Baal. Many of the women called their husbands Baal or my Lord. Okay? And you get a similar kind of a custom that came through the British era later on. We had me Lord and me Lady. Right? Right? So those kinds of titles were there, but they used the expression Baal. Okay? Now, that word was used primarily for specific idol gods that were considered to be the husbands, the lords, the masters of a particular group of people that they worshipped. And there were many Baal gods or Baalim. Okay? By the way, just for your information, if you see a word from Hebrew and it ends in I-M, like Baalim, it's a plural word. The word is in the plural form. So you could say Baalim is like bales. Okay? And I don't mean like bales of hay. Okay? Okay? Or if you see the word Elohim, okay, that could be translated Els. Or, in modern terms, gods. But there's a big difference. The word El and Elohim should properly be applied only to Yahweh because he's the only true Elohim. And being that he is Elohim, that doesn't mean he's a bunch of gods. He's not a trinity. He is one God but with all powers. And that's what the word El refers to as the force, the power that's involved. So all the powers are in this one embodiment or in this one Elohim. Make sense? But I'm just telling you the word I, or the letters I-M, on the back of most of your Hebrew nouns would be a plural form. So you'll see the word Baal, you'll see the word Baalim. Baalim is like a bunch of different Baals. And what they did, they had, yes?
So Elohim?
Elohim, see, the pagans, Baalim were their Elohim. Or the pagans' Baal gods were their gods. But there's really only one true God, and that's Yahweh Elohim. The others were pretenders. Now, let me see if I can put it another way. My wife is married to me, okay? How many husbands does she have? One. Now, if she goes around calling other men husband and treating other men as her husband, that's a problem, right? Yeah, it's more than a problem, right? And in actuality, they are not her husband. Do you follow me? Now, they may be somebody's husband, but they're not her husband. And this was the issue with Israel and Yahweh. Israel was married to Yahweh, but Israel decided she could go to all these other gods and have spiritual relations with them, which would be comparable to a wife having sexual relations with another man. And for that reason, he's calling her a whore. And I just wanted to make you aware of why this kind of terminology is used and why Yahweh just constantly talks about her that way. Do you follow me? So she's not being faithful to him. Instead, she has other lords or other gods or other Baal. Yes, ma'am. The word Baal can be used as a title, yes. And the word Baal can be applied to specific gods. In fact, what they had was a bunch of different Baals, and when they had a specific one, they would call him Baal, and I forget the different ones, but they would put another word after Baal and refer to, what's that? Baal Peor is a good example. So Baal Peor was one specific idol god. Okay? So they would have like Baal Peor, they would have other Baal gods and so forth. But these were all in reality false gods, and Israel had no business having relations with them. Does that make sense? Okay? All right. So now if you'll read there in Ezekiel, because again, he started out by using that analogy about her being a whore, and I just wanted you to understand why. Please read.
Yahweh said moreover unto me, Son of man, wilt thou judge Aholah and Aholibah? Yea, declare unto them their abominations.
Now, he explained who those women are, right? That's the house of Israel and the house of Judah. Because the nation of Israel now has been split up. They've had a civil war, they've been divided, and there is two parts, Judah and Ephraim, or Ephraim is also called Israel, and Judah is usually just called Judah. But here he's calling them Aholiab and I'm sorry, I can't remember the words exactly. But anyway, go ahead and read.
That they have committed adultery, and blood is in their hands.
Yes, now they've committed adultery, and not only adultery, but blood is in their hands. In other words, they're murderers. Now I want you to understand, to some extent here, we'll get to this, the seriousness of the murders that they committed. I mean, you all know that murder's serious, right? But the kinds of murders that they committed are particularly what is called abominations to Yahweh. Detestable, disgusting things that are just almost beyond all possible consideration. It's what you would say that only an absolute maniac would do. Somebody that's a psycho. Okay? And I'll give you an example. If my wife took our kids and took them out to this other man that she's trying to have an affair with and said, I want to be involved with you, so what I'm going to do right in front of your eyes is I'm going to slit the throat of my own kids by Terry Welsh. And she did it. That wouldn't be just murder, would it?
No.
That would be an abomination, a most detestable kind of a thing. Right? And that's literally what these people did to Yahweh. They took their own children And they sacrificed them, sometimes burning them alive in the furnaces and fry pans of these pagan Baal god idols. Yes, Molech and Milcom and so forth, which are just other names for the Baal gods. Okay? So, I want you to understand why this is serious to Yahweh. Please continue.
And with their idols have they committed adultery, and have also caused their sons, whom they bear unto me, to pass for them through the fire to devour them.
You see it? They have also caused their sons, which they bore unto me, to pass through the fire. In other words, to be burned alive, to be sacrificed by fire unto them, unto those other gods. Go ahead and read.
Moreover, this they have done unto me. They have defiled my sanctuary.
And they've defiled my sanctuary. In other words, let me put it another way, give you another analogy. That would be like, I'm sorry to pick on you, baby. I know you don't do this kind of thing and never would and so forth. But I want you to relate. I want you to understand. That would be like after she did that, taking those men and coming into our bed. In my house, my bed. That's defiling my sanctuary. Please read. Go ahead.
Whom they bear unto me to pass for them through the fire to devour them.
Yes.
Moreover, this they have done unto me. They have defiled my sanctuary in the same day, and have profaned my Sabbaths. For when they had slain their children to their idols, then they came the same day into my sanctuary to profane it.
So, you see what I'm saying? She took my kids out, killed them in front of them, said, I want you, come over to our house, to Terry and my house, and we'll just go get in the bed there. Same day. You understand why Yahweh's angry with these folks? And I'm bringing this out because I don't want you to just read over this. Usually you read this stuff and you just read over it and you go, wow, that doesn't sound very good, but you don't get exactly what the whole force and effect is of what you're reading about. Continue reading on.
And lo, thus have they done in the midst of mine house.
Yes.
And furthermore, that ye have sent for men to come from far, unto whom a messenger was sent.
All right, now, and I'm not going to go into that part, but in other words, now, they not only did that with the neighbor next door, they went and found other men way over in another town to bring them over and do the same thing. Okay? All right, now, I've got a whole series of scripture there. I want you to see what Yahweh told them about. Now, Yahweh, before they did this, and by the way, the things in Ezekiel are primarily written by virtue of a vision that Yahweh gave to Ezekiel, or visions that Yahweh gave to Ezekiel. There are other scriptures that refer to their actual physical actions more in detail. We'll get to those as we have time here. But these things in Ezekiel and in the book of Jeremiah and Ezekiel were pretty much around the same time. They were about the time that the children of Israel, well, let me see if I can get you on a timeline over here. Okay. In the year 1490 before the birth of Yahshua, 1490 years before the birth of Yahshua, Yahweh made the Old Testament or Old Covenant with Israel. That's depicted by this over here. He brought them out of Egypt, brought them into the wilderness, spoke the law down. 1490 years before the birth of Yahshua. About 700 years later, okay, they are completely going into captivity again to Babylon because of what they have done, these things that Ezekiel is telling them about, that both Jeremiah and Ezekiel are telling them about. Yahweh is going to send them into captivity again. And that's down here around roughly the period of 700 BC or 700 BBY, roughly. It's not quite exactly that time period. That gives you an idea, okay? So they corrupted themselves very dramatically, and Yahweh was patient with them for about 700 years before he even sent them into this captivity into Babylon. And even then, he only left them in captivity in Babylon for 70 years. Okay? And then he brought them back out again. So that would be, again, like my wife did this, all this stuff that we talked about, right? And what I did was I kicked her out of the house, okay? And she had to go with the worst of these SOBs that she'd had an affair with. And he abused her, beat her up, did all kinds of things, and so forth and so on. And then when she called me, I said, hey, your problem. But eventually, after 70 years, Yahweh did this with Israel. But eventually, after this had happened, I go and I say, okay, baby, I'm going to get you out. I'm coming over. I'm going to bring you home. So forth and so on. Do you understand what I'm saying? And this is exactly an analogy of what happens with Israel back here. Okay? All right, so continue on.
Deuteronomy 4:19. Unless thou lift up thine eyes unto heaven, and when thou seest the sun and the moon and the stars.
Okay, now, he's telling these people before they go over into the promised land, before they get into the land where all these Baal gods are worshipped and the Ashtaroth and all the other things. Remember, he's had them here in the wilderness for 40 years. And he basically doesn't allow them to have much of any contact with any of those people. He's given them, a period of time to clean them up after they came out of Egypt. And during that 40 years, all the people that were grown up and spiritually set in their ways and infected with the gods of Egypt, they died off in the wilderness. And there's a new birth that's going on over here into the promised land, and those people were not defiled with those pagan gods. Okay? And these were the new birth. And this, of course, shows the principle that what happens is this. With each one of us, we have to have our mind completely transformed and changed. The old heads that were going according to the customs down here in Egypt had to die. Our old man has to die. And that's not a makeover. That is a complete transformation. It is a death of the old man. And this is something that you've got to come to grips with. So then there is a burial of that old man and a resurrection of a whole new spirit in you by Yahshua the Messiah. Okay? And that would be like the resurrection of these folks and the ascension of them over into the promised land over here. But what you're reading in Deuteronomy, Yahweh's warning them before they get over there. Now, I've done all this for you, y'all in a good way. Okay? And I'm going to give you this land and the whole shot. But when you get over there, don't screw up. But nevertheless, you're going to screw up. But I'm just telling you beforehand what's going to happen, so you got a warning. And so that at least some of you will pay attention. You follow me? That's basically what he's doing here in Deuteronomy. All right, so read there in Deuteronomy where you're at.
Unless thou lift up thine eyes unto heaven, and when thou seest the sun and the moon and the stars, even all the host of heaven, shouldest be driven to worship them and serve them, which Yahweh thy Elohim hath divided unto all nations under the whole heaven.
Okay, now, he says what they were going to do was lift up their eyes to heaven. They're going to see the sun, the moon, and the stars, and they're going to be worshiping them.
Right.
Now, folks, that is the worship of Baal and Ashtaroth. Because the Baal and Ashtaroth were simply, I'm looking for a good word to put this so that it gets across. They were simply embodiments on the earth that were touchable to these people. Idols that were tangible. Local gods that were supposed to be the incarnation of the power of the sun and the moon and the stars. And what they would do is they would make these idols and make temples, temples and different things. And what they would do would be consider those particular things to be the places where they would get the power of the sun, the moon, and the stars, and be able to harness that power for their own personal use. It's just like people talk about, you've heard people talk about the power of pyramids, right? You've heard about this. The power of pyramids. All these pyramids are able to harness and concentrate different powers of the universe, and you can use these pyramids to do great things and whatever. That's exactly the same concept as it was with all these pagan gods. See, you and I tend to look at what they did and think, boy, they were stupid. Why would anybody build something here that they made with their own hands and then bow down and worship it and say, this is the God that brought us out of Egypt, when they know darn well they just made the thing themselves? Well, folks, they're no more stupid than you and I are. You just don't understand their thinking. They knew that the gold and silver and all the stuff that formed that was not the thing that brought them out of Egypt. What they're doing is they're considering all these different idols to be the embodiment of the powers of the sun, the moon, the stars, and all the powers of the universe that they're worshiping, so that they can get to the power of the sun and have influence with those gods by worshiping their idols. These are doorways. Do you follow me? They're dimensional portals, if you will. That's the concept. And what they're going to do is they're going to do worship services here so that the sun, the moon, and the stars will see it and will bless them. You follow me? This is their cell phone to the sun, the moon, and the stars. And they're going to do text and pictures. They're going to do Skype. So what they're going to do in front of these idols, literally what they do in front of these idols is they show how devoted they are to the sun, the moon, and the stars by doing such things as offering meal offerings to them, drink offerings, by having all kinds of sacrifices, including human sacrifices, sacrifices of their own firstborn children, and many sexual orgies. Now, I want you to understand about the sexual orgies. The sexual orgies were not designed for the purpose of somebody just having a party and having a fun time. That was not it. They perceived the sun, the moon, the stars as being the powers that they would have a relationship with the earth that they're living on, so that the earth would bring forth fruit, just like a woman's body could bring forth fruit or children. Do you understand what I'm saying? And so what they were trying to do was use what people call sympathetic magic. They were trying to coax or entice the sun, the moon, and the stars to have a sexual intercourse, if you will, with the earth, so that it would pour out the rain and the sun upon the earth and cause the earth to bring forth abundantly, so that they would have great crops and all kinds of things there. And they were basically doing pornography for the sun, the moon, and the stars. Do you understand what I'm saying? They were Skyping pornography to the sun, the moon, and the stars. I'm trying to use an analogy you can relate with. Okay? And that's what they would do there. And they had it down to a system. And they knew that there was a cycle by which the seasons would operate, and that the sun, the moon, and the stars would be in the skies at particular points in time, and that they would, like for example, that winter is the time when everything gets real cold and you don't have a bunch of crops and all those kinds of things, right? It's just like after this winter that we've had here this year. Everybody just cannot wait for spring, right? So, if you can go out there and Skype your pornographic influences to the sun, the moon, and the stars right about this time of year, then what you might be able to do is get the sun, the moon, and the stars to give you a fabulous early spring and great summer. Now, you think I'm kidding. I'm not kidding at all. Okay? And they would do this kind of thing to entice the sun, the moon, and the stars in their worship. Okay? And this goes back to the thing that I was mentioning, Christmas and Easter, and I don't want to bust the whole thing wide open totally, but it boils down to basically this. I mean, in its oversimplified form. People, particularly temple prostitutes, would have sexual relations on these altars and in these high places and so forth around Easter. Now, when would the children be born? Christmas. Right?
Yep.
Okay? And of course, that's in celebration. You got to understand this, because you see, this is where Christmas came to be the birth of the Son. Yahshua was not born on Christmas at all. That date for the birth of the Son of God was the date for the birth of the Sun God. And then 3 months later, 3 to 4 months later, when Easter comes around again, those children would be holy children in their religion. What I mean is they would be sacred, because they would have already been set aside for religious purposes, right? And what they would do with those children, remember, they're absolutely innocent children. Anything that's less than a year old is considered innocent. Remember, Yahweh told them about the Passover lamb, a male of the first year. Right? Okay? So what they would do, they would take this kind of thing. Oh yeah, they would take a male of the first year, human child, special child that had been born devoted to this temple worship. And then on Easter, they would slaughter that child, dip Easter eggs in his blood, and they would burn the child along with cakes that are like hot cross buns.
Right.
And that's where you got the customs for Easter.
Right.
Now it goes through a whole series of changes through different cultures, variations on the theme and so forth. Okay? But this is what Yahweh's telling them: don't do this stuff. And I've already kind of gone way ahead on the things instead of reading all the scriptures. But yes, ma'am, you were going to say something. Right, that's when it was, right. The winter solstice, that's the December 25th time, December 21st, winter solstice, and the vernal equinox, and that's related to Easter. Mm-hmm. That's exactly right. Mm-hmm. Right, these are the seasonal festivals. And those festivals came from the worship of the sun, the moon, and the stars, embodied in the worship of the different Baal and Ashtaroth. Okay, because Ashtaroth is the plural. They had an Ashtaroth, which is one specific one, so forth. Okay? All right. Continue reading. We'll get a couple more scriptures. We don't have time for a whole lot of these.
Deuteronomy 17:3.
Yes.
And hath gone and served other gods, and worshipped them, either the sun or moon or any of the hosts of heaven, which I have not commanded.
Yep. Okay. Now going down to that second list real quick, because I want you to pick up one or two there that mentions. I tell you what I want you to do is go over to Judges. I don't even know if it's on the list. The second chapter. 2 and 11, is that what it is? All right, start there. Because this is one particular place you need to be familiar with. Judges 2, and I think it's 11.
2:11. And the children of Israel did evil in the sight of Yahweh and served Balaam. And they forsook Yahweh Elohim of their fathers, which brought them out of the land of Egypt, and followed other gods.
Right.
Of the gods of the people that were round about them.
Right.
And bowed themselves unto them, and provoked Yahweh to anger.
Right.
And they forsook Yahweh and served Baal and Ashtaroth.
They provoked Yahweh and forsook him, and they served Baal and Ashtaroth. Okay? So these different Baal gods and the different Ashtaroth gods. Okay? And now you see a little bit about what their worship included and why they worshiped them that way. Continue on.
And the anger of Yahweh was hot against Israel, and he delivered them into the hands of spoilers that spoiled them, and he sold them into the hands of their enemies round about, so that they could not any longer stand before their enemies.
So in other words, Yahweh was no longer their protector.
Right.
Okay? So in other words, it's like, if that's what you want, go after it. You'll see the results. And Yahweh let them go through this time after time after time after time. And people do the same thing today. They do it in class. You bring it up to date. You tell them the truth. They don't want to hear it. Right. They want to go after it. So it's like, go your way. Do your thing. Okay? Go your way. Do your thing. And either find out you're wrong, admit it, and come honest about it, or continue to go on, and you'll have the same results as they had. Yeah. And that's what they did. Okay? 7 times they did all that kind of stuff on all these different periods of times, and then 7 times harder punishment during the days of Ezekiel and Jeremiah and so forth when they went down into Babylon. Okay? So that one in Judges there. Is there anything more there in Judges?
Yeah, a little more.
Continue,
Whithersoever they went out, the hand of Yahweh was against them for evil, for Yahweh had said, and as Yahweh had sworn unto them, they were greatly distressed. Nevertheless, Yahweh raised up judges, which delivered them out of the hand of those that spoiled them.
So Yahweh would raise up judges or saviors, deliverers, and it would save them out of the hands of those that spoiled them and so forth. Okay, all right. Again, I didn't get too far with all these scriptures. There's probably a good 20 scriptures easily involved with this, but I hope at least you have an idea of what's going on here when you read this stuff about the Baal and the Ashtaroth and why it's a problem to worship these pagan idols, okay, and where it came from. And the vast majority of this pagan worship came from the idea of worshiping the sun, the moon, and the stars. And it's just like he was talking about earlier, the horoscope and the zodiac. That's where this all came from, was the concept of people using those things. Oh yeah, I'm a Gemini. What are you? Are we matched? You know, I mean, all that junk. And people do that all the time, and they think it's harmless. They think it's harmless. And, you know, it would be if you really were not under control of it, but the problem is you think it makes a difference. And you're giving credit to the sun, the moon, and the stars for controlling your life instead of to Yahshua. And that's where the problem lies. And so that's a modern, very minimal form of it, because most people don't get deep into it. But some people get all deep off into certain things. They get real involved. And that becomes witchcraft and demonism and so forth and so on. Okay? But we think these things, we see these things and we don't think of them as being pagan idolatry. Well, most of the things came from pagan idolatry. It's like he was talking about earlier. Even the names of the months of the year. Even the names of the days of the week. Sunday, the day of the sun. Monday, the day of the moon. Tuesday, the day of Dios, the Norse god. Right. Wednesday, the day devoted to Woden. Okay? Thursday, the day devoted to the god Thor. All this stuff. Saturday, the day devoted to the god Saturn. And these all come from the sun, the moon, the stars. You see that? And you think you're not affected by it. And you ought to be at least aware of what's going on. so that you are literally, and you will not be free from this until you are literally free from it by Yahshua the Messiah. So I hope this is of value to you and encouragement. Praise Yahshua.